Are early game flyers overrated in Fire Emblem? Most Fire Emblem players tend to agree that early game flyers are some of the best units the series has ever seen. But the reality is, maybe some portions of that goodness are a little bit overrated beyond that of what we usually expect to see. The fire utility is very good, sure, but is the combat really that good as well? And I'm going to look at a couple of scenarios here featuring a couple of units from the games. We're going to be looking at their performance and seeing if the myth of how good these early game flyers are is true, or if they're just exaggerations. I want to start off with Florina. She is an interesting case. I chose her first precisely because of this idea that she can straddle this line between being really, really good depending on how you play the game, or being kind of mediocre if you take a different approach to the game. I think it's impossible to look at Florina without actually bringing up the fact of limb mode. When you think about limb mode, you have a unit that can basically soak up all that experience in the early part of the game and has pretty good combat against the majority of weak enemies that the game has in that point. Because of that, she's a reasonable target for experience. Once she joins back in Hector hard mode or in Eliwood hard mode, whatever you're playing, she can now contribute relatively well because her level's a little bit higher and she's scaled better in comparison to the enemies that she's fighting. But when we look at Florina without limb mode, I think you need to take into consideration the following. You are now stuck with a level 3 Pegasus Knight with 22 physical bulk in a mode where deployment slots are significantly more competitive, and in 3 maps you're going to basically get another Pegasus that has just better base stats anyway. There are only 3 maps in between that, and of those 3 maps, one of them doesn't really value the flying at all. It values more the mobility, which is fair. The other 2 do have some good advantages for using the flying, particularly the Port of Baden and the pirate ship. The pirate ship, you can do some pretty cool strats by using pure waters and javelins to basically take out the druids. This is much easier and more efficient if you have limb mode Florina, but if you don't, there is an actual high risk that Florina just can't take successive rounds of combat and you would just yeet Marcus in there with the hand axe and kill everything anyway. So it's not really that you would benefit from it. There is some utility to it, of course, but it's not one of the best case scenarios of her usage. It is drastic, the performance difference between Florina in limb mode and Florina without limb mode. And because of that, I think we have to take into consideration how much does Florina actually contribute, and I think the answer is pretty obvious. A limb mode Florina is a fantastic unit and will be able to contribute from beginning to end, probably being one of the best units you have in the game. I want to move on to Shanna. Is she the biggest bait of all time? Some people swear that Shanna is the best thing since sliced bread, while others completely hate her. I think it's a twofold process here. She is good in a way, but bad in other ways. Shanna is known for being the only flyer up until the midpoint of the Western Isles. Because of that, she has unparalleled utility with the form of flying. She can reach other objectives that other units can't. She has the utility of being able to carry people over certain areas to allow for an easier time. However, I think that her low strength plus the 4 con aren't really doing her that much favors in terms of combat. And people that tend to rate Shanna's combat really well actually are kind of overestimating and overvaluing how much she can actually do in terms of combat. There is some argument to have that if you promote Shanna before you reach the Western Isles, she has accesses to swords and she can really mop up those units there in terms of just being able to dodge and fight them all. But here's the caveat. Almost everybody agrees that those axe fighters on the Western Isles are just there as experienced soaks. Like, they only exist to be absolutely destroyed by your sword users so that they can be trained up. So for that, it's almost like saying getting Shanna to the sword point makes the easier part of the game easier, which is not something that I really value, and would prefer a unit that actually makes the harder part of the game easier. Another thing to take note is that training Shanna requires you to actually do combat against a bunch of axe fighters and bow units that are the majority of enemy types during the first parts. There are some soldiers here and there which you can get free kills on, but to be honest, her matchup for the first 7 to 8 chapters of the game are not a very good setup for her. Like, it's actually pretty difficult to kill units with her unless you specifically set it up for that. And I think people really tend to ignore that and just go like, oh, but Shanna is great. And that's not really true. She does have difficulty killing units in the early parts of the game. Not only that, she also is at risk of dying to most of those units in the early part of the game, and she needs the setup in order to be able to grow. then I don't really need Shanna to do the combat. I'm just going to use her as a ferry bot to get to places quickly and get the objectives, which is great. She's really good at that part because she can get the houses, get all that stuff. So definitely deserves the deployment slot on flyer utility alone. However, when it comes to combat, if I'm going to use another unit that is a flyer and has combat, I just usually pick up Thea right then and there because she has the hard mode bonuses and just can do better combat at that point in time. She has better strength, she has about the same speed, and she has better cons, so she doesn't even get weighed down that much. For that regard, I would prefer to do that investment there. I think Thea is the better target for investment in the long term. But I do think Shanna will always warrant a deployment spot for that part of the game, if that makes any sense. I can see valuing her highly if you do commit for her, and I don't fault anyone for doing that. Sometimes it's just the easier route. You're already investing in her, you just go for that. And there's no real negative to that, especially since Thea's recruitment can be a little annoying at times. Caeda. Whew, what to say about this unit. I chose Caeda specifically from Shadow Dragon, the remake, because this is the shining example of the flyer being the best unit in the game. Even though her strength growth is rather poor, it doesn't really matter because of the way that you can forge weapons and make her wing spear just be absolutely cracked. She can double the majority of enemies in the early parts of the game. She's one of the best recipients of the Angelic Robe just to boost her HP up so that she can do more and more combat. She has effective against the most common enemy type of the game itself, and they're usually really bulky, and she can just either one-tap them or just guarantee a kill doubling no matter what. She can promote it to a class that has bonkers move, so she can just get to places. She can also intercept other flyers before they reach you, so she can fight them off. Her coming in chapter 1, having all that availability, being able to do all that combat, having access to javelins, having access to different promotion paths, being able to even become a paladin if you want to as well. It just goes to show how powerful this early flying utility is. And this is a combination of being the flyer for a good amount of time that you get, and of course you can reclass Jake into a wyvern too, that's fine. But Caeda just has that consistency from the start all the way until the end of the game. I want to move on to another unit that I think is overlooked sometimes, and it's Sumia. On one hand, Awakening is a game of favorites, meaning that you can just choose a Juggernaut and make it work. This makes it so that it's even possible to use units like Vake or Donald, get them online, dump all your resources into them, and then later on reap the benefits and say how good they are while ignoring all the work you did. The Flyers, I feel, have a more different role in this game, almost a supportive role. Now, I can't really talk about Sumia without talking about the Dark Flyer class, which gives access to Gale Force. The whole point of the Pegasus line is usually to get to Gale Force so that you can kill a unit and then act again, which is incredibly powerful, right? That's one of the best abilities in all time, because you can just hit somebody, come back, run out again, do it again, rinse and repeat. There is a way to use Sumia paired up with Crom so that you can get Gale Force before Lucina's even born or even joins your party. Since that's the case, you can actually get Gale Force on Lucina right off the bat. This is not impossible to do. It's actually not difficult for people that have streamlined the process of playing Fire Emblem Awakening. I'm guarantee you that better players than I do, and there's a lot better players than I do in Awakening, can actually do this consistently. The thing is, for me, it just never quite happens organically. I'm always sitting there trying to pick my battles so that Sumia can maybe get a kill here, maybe get a kill there, and I never really find a scenario in which I can sit there and just farm on enemy phase like I do with Robin and Crom and Frederick. It just doesn't quite happen in the way that I think it does, and when it happens, it's already too late in the game for me to even pass on Gale Force to Lucina. Regardless, still very useful to have that, and even if you were to get rally movement alone, that would be fantastic. But what I really appreciate about Sumia's early game's contributions are the bonuses that she offers as a pair-up. She gives speed and a couple of other stats that are pretty useful, but speed is the most important one because it allows most units to reach doubling thresholds. She also builds support super fast with Crom, meaning you can quickly activate that dual guard ability with him, and it's super useful in any scenario that you look at. It also works because you can kind of merge into Sumia, then she can fly out to an area, then switch over to the unit that you want to tank with, and now you've just gained all that ground. And because of that, that will always be valuable. People like to say that Awakening doesn't really need a lot of flyer utility in the maps. I kind of disagree. I think that there's a lot of good points to having the flyer utility, more so the move, but since Sumia already comes with that move married with the flyer utility, like, it's just really useful to have. This is a case of which the utility and the assistance that's brought on by her being an early flyer outweighs her combat potential. Not saying that she can't get there, but I just feel that you would look more at the bonuses from being in the Pegasus line, such as the movement, the flight, rally movement, Gale Force, and things like that. Last but not least, I want to talk about Chloe. Chloe is what I believe is peak performance in Fire Emblem from an early flyer. She just has a lot of good things going for her. She has good mixed bulk, she has good mixed offenses, she has pretty solid build, she can take great advantage of using Sigurd Ring on a flyer. There is just so much that Chloe can do in the early portions of the game that it's pretty much wild to think that she's not one of the best units in the game. Even in the scenario where combat is not important, Chloe is still useful because she can just go in, snipe a unit, and pull back out with Canter. This is useful in a chapter that you fight Hortensia for the second time, where you can just snipe the guy that's using the magic ballista and just pull out, and then it forces Hortensia to move up, and now you can just body her too and just continuously use this to your advantage so that you actually dictate the pace of the fight as opposed to the enemy dictating your rate of movement, which I greatly prefer. After the game starts to progress and you start getting some really heavy hitters like Kagetsu, Marin, Panette, she starts to suffer from this effect that's like the not as good output as the other units, but this is also easily remedied by using something like a reclass into Martial Master, which allows her to now quad most of the enemies in the game due to how the speed works with her cap. Her cap is actually higher for the Martial Master class than the conventional other units, allowing her to basically abuse Flashing Fists to the maximum degree. You pair this with Erica, odds are, if you quad, that enemy unit will die. Because of that, she also becomes super useful in boss killing, and she just can go in, kill a boss, and then finish the map. And these things are really useful towards the end of the game, where a lot of them become just kill boss, end this map quickly before you get swarmed by reinforcements. Ultimately, there is no scenario in which I would sit here and say that investing into Chloe will not pay off, especially in a game like Fire Emblem Engage, where any unit can be invested into and do reasonably well. But Chloe will absolutely use those resources in such a manner that will facilitate any gameplay that you have going forward. So we've watched all this, and the question still remains: are the early game flyers overrated? Well, personally, I'm going to say no, they're not overrated. Even though their combat may be overrated in some cases, the reality is most of the times the flyer utility alone is enough to justify bringing that early flyer. Like, there just is no way that you would sit there and be like, it's not useful to have this. Even if not, in most games, there will always be a use for them and a way to salvage their combat, even if it's not stellar. It'll still be, on average, better than the grand majority of the game. And if you're just slightly worse than some of the heavier hitters, how bad are you really? Right? Like, you're not really that bad. But one thing that is consistent across all of these is the fact that the early flyers are definitely worth that investment. They're definitely worth the deployment slots. And even if you're going to bench them at some point, it doesn't matter. Bring them along for the ride and then switch them out, because they are absolutely useful and something that you should definitely experience in your next playthroughs of Fire Emblem. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. This has been a fantastic experience. I really wanted to do a video about early flyers for quite a while. I know that I said that, are they overrated, thinking that maybe they would be, but they're not. They're actually really good, and I think you should take advantage of them for sure. You guys, please go ahead, like and subscribe. I really do appreciate it. I'll be seeing you guys next time. Have a wonderful day.